Sometimes the only way out of a cage is to become something the cage was never built to hold. Tessa had been keeping her stepfather's books since she was 16. Not because anyone asked her to, because no one else in that house could add past 100 without using their fingers. And the rent was always 3 weeks late, and she had learned early that numbers don't lie the way people do. Numbers sit there, flat and patient, and they tell you exactly where you stand. She had always preferred that to the alternative. She was 26 the night. Gareth called her into the kitchen and told her to sit down. He was already drunk. She could tell by the way he set his glass on the counter, too carefully, the way men do when they're trying to convince the room they're sober. His eyes didn't quite track right. There was a folder on the table between them, and that was the part that scared her. Gareth wasn't a folder kind of man. Folders meant someone else had been involved. "There's something we need to sort out," he said. She didn't answer. She had learned not to fill his silences for him. It only gave him something to push back against. "I owe a man some money," he said. "A significant amount." "How much?" "That's not." "How much, Gareth?" he told her. She sat very still. It was the kind of number that explained the folder. It was the kind of number that didn't come from bad luck or poor decisions. It came from a specific choice, made more than once, to borrow from someone who did not extend credit out of goodwill. "His name is Vance," Gareth said. "Cole Vance." She knew the name. Everyone in that part of the city knew the name, the way you know the name of a weather system before it makes landfall. You don't need to have met it personally to understand what it's capable of. "He's agreed to a settlement," Gareth said, "of a kind." She looked at the folder. "Don't," she said. "Tessa. Don't you dare say it." But he did. He said it in that particular way he had, where he made it sound like something happening to him rather than something he was doing. A transfer of debt, he called it. A business arrangement. Cole Vance needed someone with a specific skill set, and Gareth had mentioned that his stepdaughter had been managing the accounts for a small logistics company for 3 years, and that she had a mind for numbers, and that she was, above all, discreet. "He doesn't want," Gareth started. "I know what he wants," she said. "He wants someone he owns. It's not like that." She stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, the street was wet and orange from the sodium lights, and a man was walking a dog that kept stopping to sniff at the base of every parking meter. Normal. Ordinary. She watched it because she needed something ordinary to look at. "And if I say no," she said. "He'll take the house," Gareth said, "and everything in it. And that includes your mother's medical bills, which, as you know, are currently routed through my—" "Stop." She didn't turn around. "I heard you." She thought about her mother, who had been sleeping 14 hours a day since the stroke, who still sometimes called her by the wrong name, her older sister's name, the one who had moved to Vancouver and stopped returning calls, who needed someone to manage her prescriptions and her appointments, and her transition back to part-time mobility, all of which cost money that Tessa had been, until now, earning honestly. She thought about the logistics company where she'd worked, the clean fluorescent light of the back office, the quiet satisfaction of a reconciled ledger, the way her supervisor had told her once, that she had a gift for finding the number that didn't belong. She turned around. "I want it in writing," she said, "that my mother's debts are cleared, all of them. I want his signature on it before I walk out that door." Gareth blinked. He had clearly not expected her to negotiate. "I don't know if he'll—" "Then you'd better call him and ask," she said, "because those are my terms, and if he doesn't agree, you can explain to him yourself why the arrangement fell through." The car came for her at 7 the following evening, black, unmarked, windows that didn't let the street light in. The driver didn't speak. She had packed one bag, practical things. Things that didn't announce anything about who she was or what she valued, because she had already decided that whatever came next, she was not going to give anyone in that world an inventory of her vulnerabilities. The document had arrived that afternoon. His signature was precise and angular, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was forced to practice it as a child and never quite forgave the person who made them. She had photographed it. She had emailed it to herself from 3 different accounts. She had printed a copy and left it in a sealed envelope with her downstairs neighbor, with instructions to open it if Tessa hadn't called within 30 days. She was not her stepfather. She understood the value of documentation. The car moved through the city and then out of it, north on the highway, then off on an exit she didn't recognize, past a series of industrial properties that gave way, unexpectedly, to a long private road flanked by birch trees. The house at the end of it was large in the way that serious money is large, not showy, not trying to impress, just spacious and set back and very, very quiet. She was shown inside by a man who introduced himself only as Fen. He had the look of someone who had been trained to be present without being noticeable, which she recognized as a particular kind of skill. She noted the exits as they walked. Ground floor, at least 4. The layout suggested the original structure had been expanded at least twice. Good bones, she thought absently. Whoever had bought it had known what they were looking at. Fen led her to a room on the east side of the building and left her there. It wasn't a cell. That was the first thing she registered. It was an office, a working office, with a wide desk and a proper chair and filing cabinets along one wall, and a window that looked out over a dark field. There was a laptop on the desk, closed. There was a landline. There was, on a small table near the door, a carafe of water and a coffee setup that looked like it cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She sat down in the chair behind the desk. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to. She sat down anyway. Cole Vance came in 40 minutes later. She had constructed an image of him from the name alone, from the way people said it, quietly, and usually while looking at something else, and from the shape of the debt he held over her stepfather, which told her more than most people's resumes. She had expected something theatrical, a man who understood the weight of his own name and had learned to wear it as a costume. He wasn't that. He was tall, with the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped needing to fill a room by force. There were grey threads in his dark hair that he hadn't bothered to address. A scar ran from the edge of his jaw to somewhere below the collar of his shirt. He moved with the measured economy of a person who had spent a significant portion of his adult life in situations where unnecessary motion was a liability. He looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at everything. Not cold exactly, but calibrated, taking stock. "You sat at my desk," he said. "Your assistant put me in this room," she said. "This is the only chair. There's a chair by the window." She glanced at it, a low, soft thing, clearly decorative. "That's not a working chair," she said, "and I assumed I was here to work." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, more like adjustment, the slight recalibration of someone who had walked in expecting one thing and found another. "Tessa," he said, not a question. "Yes, your stepfather tells me you can find a discrepancy in a ledger the way some people find a splinter. I feel. My stepfather says a lot of things." He said this one with genuine admiration. He came around to the other side of the desk, her side, now, and leaned against it, which she understood was deliberate, an assertion of territory without the theatrics of asking her to move. "You'll be working with my financial records. Specifically, the accounts that interface with the legitimate side of the operation. I have businesses, several, that require someone who can read 2 sets of numbers at once and make them agree with each other. My current accountant retired suddenly." "Did he?" Vance looked at her steadily. "He moved to Nova Scotia. He sends a card at Christmas." She held his gaze. "What happened to the books while he was transitioning out?" "They were maintained at a functional level. Meaning no one stole anything, but no one was particularly watching either." She pulled the laptop toward her without asking. "I'll need access credentials, a full account history going back at least 3 years, and a list of all entities, subsidiary, holding, shell, and operational, that feed into the primary structure. I'll also need to know which regulatory bodies have any level of oversight, even nominal, so I know which numbers have to be clean for external purposes, and which ones I have more latitude with." She looked up. "And I want my own password. Not one your IT person set for me. One I generate and hold." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I'm terrified of you," she said. but I've found that being terrified of something doesn't preclude having professional standards. She did not go home, that had been made clear, though not unkindly. She had a room on the upper floor, a real room, with a door that locked from the inside, and blackout curtains, and a bathroom that smelled of cedar. She noted, on her second day, that the lock was substantial and appeared to have been recently installed. She did not know what to make of that. She filed it and moved on. The work was immediately interesting, which she had not permitted herself to expect. The books were not, as she had feared, simply a mess of cash flows obscured by layers of misdirection. They were, in fact, remarkably structured. Someone had been very careful, for a very long time, to maintain a logic to the whole thing. What they lacked was a person who could sit with two contradictory realities and find the thread that ran through both. Most accountants, Tessa had observed, were either very good at the official version or very good at the unofficial one. Being fluent in both required a kind of cognitive flexibility that most people preferred not to develop. She developed it at 16, managing the books of a man who ran a cash-in-hand landscaping operation and paid half his employees under the table. She had been doing it ever since. By the end of her first week, she had found 4 discrepancies that had been sitting unaddressed for 11 months. 2 of them were small enough to be clerical, rounding errors, transposition mistakes, the kind of thing that happens when someone rushes. The other 2 were not. She printed the summary and brought it to Vance. He was in the room she had mentally labeled the operations room, not an office, more of a large, low-lit space with a long table and several monitors, where she had noticed people coming and going at hours that suggested the work did not respect circadian rhythms. He looked up when she came in. She put the papers on the table in front of him. "Page 2, she said. The 3rd line item and the notation below it. Somebody has been siphoning off a consistent percentage from the logistics subsidiary for the better part of a year. It's designed to look like variance in fuel costs, but the pattern is too regular. Variance doesn't have a pattern. That's why it's called variance." He looked at the papers, then at her. "How long did it take you to find this?" 4 days, she paused. "I would have found it in 2, but I wanted to be certain." He studied the notation for a long time. She stood and waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the underrated skills, waiting without filling the silence with yourself. "Do you know who it is?" he said finally. "I have a reasonable idea, based on access logs and the timing of entries. I'd rather tell you once I'm completely certain rather than name someone on a reasonable idea. That seems like the kind of mistake that has consequences in your line of work." He looked at her for a moment in a way that she couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't the look she had been bracing for, the one that reminded her why she had originally been afraid. It was something else. "Quieta. 3 days, he said. "To be certain." 2, she said. "I work quickly when I know what I'm looking for." She called her mother on the 9th day. The call was short. Her mother was tired, which was normal, but she sounded better, which wasn't always the case. Someone from the home care service had come by. The bills, apparently, had been sorted. Her mother didn't know the details and didn't ask. She just said that the nice woman from the agency had told her everything was taken care of, and that Tessa didn't need to worry. Tessa sat with her phone in her hands for a long time after they hung up. She was not naive. She understood the nature of relief that came from a man like Vance. She understood that being taken care of by someone in that position was not a neutral act. It came with weight. It came with implication. She had not yet decided what she thought about that, and she had learned, over the years, to distrust decisions made before she had thought them through properly. But she noticed, turning the phone over in her hands, that the relief was real. That was the honest part, the part she couldn't argue away. She confirmed her suspicion about the thefts on day 11. It was a man named Greer. He had been with the operation for 6 years, long enough to understand the structure well, and to believe, apparently, that the gaps in oversight created by the accountant's retirement constituted an opportunity. He was not stupid, exactly. He had been patient. He had constructed a system that would have been very difficult to find if you were looking for it the way most people look, methodically, chronologically, checking the obvious places first. Tessa did not look that way. She looked the way she had always looked, sideways at the shape of the hole, waiting for something to sit wrong. She brought the documentation to Vance. He went through it slowly and completely, which she respected. He didn't perform understanding, he actually read it, and asked 2 questions that told her he had genuinely absorbed the mechanics of what she'd found. "This is thorough," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "There's a difference." "Yes," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "You understand that I'm going to handle this? I assumed so. That's not my area," he said. "It's not." He set the papers down. "Is there anything you need? For the work? Equipment? Access? Anything you're missing?" She had not expected the question. She recovered quickly. "The secondary logistics ledger is missing 18 months of entries from 2021. I'd like those retrieved if they exist anywhere. I'll have Fen look. And coffee," she said. "The good kind, not the pods." He looked at her for a moment with that same unclassifiable expression. "I'll see to it," he said. The thing about Greer was that he had friends inside the operation, and some of those friends had a passing interest in who had found him out. This was not, it turned out, entirely safe for Tessa. She became aware of it gradually, the way she became aware of most things, which was not through being told, but through noticing the things that didn't sit quite right. The way a particular man began to appear in her peripheral vision more often than the layout of the building would naturally explain. The way she found one morning that the coffee setup in the office had been moved, not significantly, just slightly, in the way that things get moved when someone has been through a space and tried to put it back correctly but doesn't quite know where correctly is. She didn't mention it to Vance. She wasn't sure yet that she trusted him with her fear. She trusted him with the work. That was different. She mentioned it to Fen, who listened without expression and then disappeared for most of the afternoon. She didn't ask what he did with the information. She assumed it was handled. She kept working. On the 19th day, she woke up at 2 in the morning to raised voices below her, and then a very specific kind of quiet that settled over the house, the way quiet settles after a thing has been resolved. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the subsequent silence and thought, in a very precise and unemotional way, that she should probably figure out what she was going to do. The contract Gareth had signed was for 60 days, 60 days of her time, in exchange for the clearance of the debt. It had seemed clear enough when she'd negotiated it. It was beginning to seem less clear. Vance came to the office at 7 the next morning, while she was already at the desk. He looked like he hadn't slept. He sat in the window chair, the decorative one, and she did not point out the irony. "There was a situation last night," he said. "I heard Greer's associates believed, incorrectly, that accessing you was an efficient way of communicating a message to me." She looked at him. And they've been disabused of that belief." He met her eyes. "You were not at risk. I want you to know that. Were you aware it might happen?" A pause. Just one beat, but she was good at reading beats. "I had reason to think there might be an attempt," he said. "I made arrangements. You could have told me. I didn't want to alarm you unnecessarily." She set down her pen. "Vance," she said, "I'm a woman living in your house, working with your money, in a situation I did not choose. The thing that would alarm me unnecessarily is finding out after the fact that you knew I might be in danger and decided to manage the information rather than give it to me. Do you understand the distinction?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I'm not a variable in your operation," she said. "I'm a person. I need to be treated like one. I understand. Do you?" "Yes," he said. More quietly this time. "I do." She picked up her pen. She went back to the ledger. She could feel him still sitting in the window chair, and after a while she heard him shift and get up and leave without saying anything else. She thought that was probably the most honest conversation she'd had with him. She found the third problem on day 27. This one was larger. This one went back years, predated the retired accountant, and had been structured with enough sophistication that she suspected someone with real financial training had set it up. Not inside the operation, outside it. Someone who had been paid to build something that would take quietly and consistently, and never call attention to itself. It was siphoning from a different place. Not the logistics subsidiary, the property holdings, the ones that looked on paper like a perfectly reasonable portfolio of commercial real estate in 3 Canadian cities. She had been reviewing those files at night after the regular work was done, out of the particular professional itch that comes when you sense something is off, but can't yet articulate why. On the 26th night she found the seam. She brought it to Vance after midnight. She knocked on the door of the operations room. He was the only one still in there, and he looked up when she came in, and she crossed the room and put the documentation on the table and said, "You need to look at this right now." He looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. "How much?" he said. She told him. He stood up from the table and walked to the window, and she watched his back, and she understood in that moment something she hadn't quite let herself understand before. This man, who was feared in certain circles the way weather systems are feared, was also carrying something. He had built something that people inside it had been quietly taking from for years, and he had not known, and that particular knowledge, that the structure he had held together had been leaking, was doing something to him that had nothing to do with the money. "I can trace the external party," she said. "The one who set it up. It'll take me a few days. The structure is good, but structures always have an author. They always have a style." He turned around. "Why?" he said, meaning, "Why are you doing this?" "Beyond the contract. Beyond the 60 days. She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. "Because it's the right thing to find," she said. "And because I'm very good at finding it. And because she stopped." "Because," he said. "Because someone built something and trusted it to hold," she said, "and people took advantage of that. And that makes me angry. It's a simple reason." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stay," he said. "Not as a contract. Differently." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to be something you don't want to be," he said. "I'm asking you to consider whether this." He made a gesture that encompassed the room, the files, the entire architecture of what she'd been doing for 27 days. "Whether this is something you'd choose, on different terms. Terms you set." She looked at the files on the table. She thought about the logistics company with the clean fluorescent lights, and the ledgers that reconciled quietly and without drama, and the life she had been building around things that were small and predictable and safe. She thought about the number Gareth had told her, and the look on his face when she demanded documentation before she agreed to anything, and the way she'd felt driving out here in the dark, terrified, yes, but also something else. Something she hadn't named, because naming it felt like a concession. "I set the terms," she said. "Yes, all of them, within reason." "No," she said. "All of them. That's my condition. Take it or don't." He was quiet for a long time. She waited. She was good at waiting. "All of them," he said. She found the external party on day 31, a firm in Calgary, operating behind 3 layers of corporate structure that had been retained 7 years ago by a man who had since moved to a non-extradition country and appeared to have believed, incorrectly, that distance constituted immunity. She laid out the documentation on the operations table. Vance came in, and Fenn, and 2 other people she had started to learn the names of. She walked them through it the way she had once walked a room full of managers through a budget reconciliation. Clearly, in order, with the evidence sequenced so that each piece built on the last. When she finished, the room was quiet. Fenn said, "How? Author's style," she said. "Every financial structure has one. The way sentences have rhythm. Once you've read enough of them, you start to recognize the voice." Vance was looking at her with the expression she had stopped trying to categorize and started instead, just allowing. "What do you need to complete the trace?" he said. "I have what I need. The rest is yours to handle." She started gathering her papers. "I'll have a full summary to you by end of day. Tessa." She looked up. "Thank you," he said. She thought about all the things she could say to that. She thought about Gareth's kitchen, and the folder on the table, and the way the rain had sounded through the window while her life was being reorganized without her consent. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, saying that everything had been taken care of. She thought about 27 nights in a room with a lock she held the key to, and the particular texture of work that felt like it mattered, and the way it felt to walk into a room and say, "Here is the thing you didn't know. Here is what it means. Here is what comes next." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just make sure the terms are in writing." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the precondition of one. "They will be," he said. She nodded once. She went back to the desk. Outside the window, the birch trees were beginning to come into leaf. She hadn't noticed that before, the slow green arriving at the edges of everything. And the morning light was coming in flat and pale and very clear. She opened the ledger. She picked up her pen. The numbers sat there, patient and exact, the way they always had, telling her precisely where she stood. She realized exactly where she had chosen to be.